Looking at Vivian's back, Gerald smiled in his heart and did not care too much. Trevor was a little speechless and said, I didn't expect Vivian to work here. We will be humiliated by her every day. Gerald was stunned and smiled slightly, just ignore her, and maybe we'll humiliate her instead. Regarding Trevor's position and salary, he had already discussed all the arrangements with Tyrone. His position was the vacant position of the director of the HR department. Of course, there was no need for him to do anything. He only needed to rest in his office and do whatever he wanted. Are we here to be security guards? Trevor asked again. Gerald scratched his head and said, I don't know either. Let's wait and see what they say after we go in. Trevor was skeptical. The two of them entered the door and walked upstairs. Soon, they arrived on the 6th floor, at the door of the general manager's office. Damn, Trevor was scared and said, what are we doing? Do we need to see the general manager? Is this an interview? Just think that it is an interview, Gerald smiled and said. Don't be too nervous. By the way, did you bring your bank card and ID card that I asked you to bring? Yes. Trevor nodded, and his voice trembled a little. Then go in, Gerald said. Aren't you coming with me? Trevor became even more nervous. Gerald smiled and said, no need. Don't worry. The general manager is quite easy to get along with. Oh. Trevor heaved a sigh of relief and knocked on the door, trembling. Come in. Inside, Tyrone's voice came out. Then Trevor shivered and walked into the room. When Tyrone saw Trevor, he smiled and said, Trevor, right. Sit down, please. Don't be nervous. Hello, boss. Trevor did not dare to sit down. In fact, he was just a farmer. Most of the people he came into contact with were poor. When he usually heard about the rich or those in power, he felt that it was nothing. But when he really faced them, especially when this might also involve his livelihood, he was really nervous. Well, you're a good person. I like you, Tyrone laughed and said. You have been hired. Trevor was stunned. Although he had never been interviewed, didn't the TV show that he had to ask a lot of questions during the interview? Tyrone smiled and said, that's how I am. You look simple and honest. I like it very much. How about this? Our company only lacks the position of the director of the HR department. You can do it. Usually, there is nothing to do. Just sign some papers. As for the annual salary, it is $160,000. Do you think that's enough? What? When he heard $160,000, Trevor's legs went soft and he almost fell to the ground. He leaned against the wall, and his eyes were wide open as he looked at Tyrone in shock. He wouldn't want me to sell drugs, right? At this time, all sorts of thoughts appeared in Trevor's mind. This, boss, it is too high. This job, I don't dare to do it. I am an honest man. All of a sudden, Trevor did not know what to say. Outside, the corner of Gerald's mouth twitched. Ads by Pub Future. This guy is too cowardly. However, Tyrone's eloquence and patient persuasion made Trevor believe that this was a very proper job. However, when he walked out, he was still dizzy. Looking at Gerald, he had a lot of questions to ask. But at this time, Tyrone also came out and said, how about this? I will take you to the Human Resources Department to handle the employment procedures, and then I will take you to familiarize yourself with the Human Resources Department. Your job is the second leader in command of the Human Resources Department. By the way, the bank card is ready, and you will be paid half of your annual salary later. The position's annual salary will be paid half in advance, and the remaining half will be paid by months. What about him? Trevor pointed at Gerald. Tyrone smiled at Gerald and did not say anything. He pulled Trevor to the Human Resources Department. Downstairs, looking at Trevor's timid look, Gerald felt that it was a little funny. He rubbed his nose and looked at Trevin, who was far away. With the salary, Liam's surgery fee should be settled. As he said this, he walked downstairs. He naturally did not need to go to work. He could leave the work to anyone he trusted. He, who had not recovered his memories, did not know the authority of New Bank's Diamond Card, but now, very clear about it, he was. Diamond Card could mobilize a huge amount of funds in New Bank. At the same time, he could also use the financial team of New Bank for free. In other words, Kiera helped him before because it was within the authority of his bank card. Of course, Kiera did not speak ill of him because of his clothes at first, which made Gerald have a good impression of her. With such a top financial team, he was not worried that Tyrone would do anything to the company's money. Gerald thought as he walked downstairs to the entrance of the first floor. At this time, a few people were busy. They were putting a photo on the wall. Gerald glanced at it when he passed by, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Then he didn't stay too long. He went outside and took a taxi, heading straight to Cherry Garden. At this time, Macy and Valerie should be back soon, and he could ask them what the specific mission was. Just as Gerald left, Glory World's Human Resources Department was quite busy. Tyrone walked in with Trevin. He clapped his hands and said, "Everyone, put down the things in your hands for a moment." After yesterday, everyone in the company knew that the company had been purchased and Tyrone had turned from a boss to a worker. However, people still respected Tyrone very much. Vivian, who was sitting in her seat, raised her head. She saw Trevin, who was standing next to Tyrone, and was slightly stunned. Wasn't he the one beside Gerald? His clothes are too shabby. Why is he following Mr. Slater, the new bodyguard? Could it be that Gerald is also Slater's bodyguard and not a security guard? Vivian thought in her heart. After all, she understood that Gerald could be a bodyguard. In her opinion, although Gerald was a loser, he was strong and muscular. He should be able to be a bodyguard. At that moment, Tyrone opened his mouth and said, "Let me introduce everyone to the new HR director, Trevin Knott. Come, Trevin, introduce yourself." Trevin had never spoken to so many people before. He was a little nervous, but he still forced himself to say, "Hello, guys, my name is Trevin Knott. I hope we can get along well." On the side, Vivian's mind went blank. This poor loser who had been following Gerald 2 days ago with his face covered in dirt, carrying bricks, suddenly came to work at her company, and even became her immediate superior. Vivian felt that her world collapsed. "All right, I have something to do. Brennan, take Mr. Knott to familiarize himself with the Human Resources Department," Tyrone said to someone not far away. "Yes, Mr. Slater." A young man stood up. The Human Resources Department returned to calm and busy. Of course, most people were talking about Trevin's arrival. Vivian, on the other hand, was sitting in her seat in a daze. She felt that something was wrong. Trevin was the HR director. Could it be that he was Tyrone's relative? He was the one who introduced Gerald. Then what was Gerald doing in the company? Gerald had previously said that he would make her regret it. Could it be that he had come to Glory World to work? Many thoughts appeared in her mind. "Hello, Vivian." At this time, a woman next to Vivian said, "Have you seen our new boss?" Vivian was a little annoyed. She shook her head and said, "I haven't seen him yet." "What's wrong? The one who can buy our company must be a big shot. He should be at least 40 or 50 years old." "Not at all," the woman smiled mysteriously. "Didn't I go out just now? When I came back, I saw the picture of the new boss hanging on the wall. He is not old and looks only in his 20s. A young man from a rich family." Vivian's expression changed, and there was even a hint of excitement in her eyes. Gerald did not know what had happened in the Human Resources Department. He took a taxi and returned to his residence in Cherry Garden. Coincidentally, when he had just arrived at the door, he met Mary, who went out to buy food and came home. Gerald, what are you doing in the Cherry Garden? When Mary saw Gerald, she naturally showed no kindness. She glared at Gerald and said, "Are you still unwilling to give up? You've already signed it. Irene has nothing to do with you anymore. Hurry up and get lost. Don't come here and disgust me." Gerald smiled in his heart. Irene's father was a reasonable and good person, but he married such a woman. He shook his head and did not want to talk to her. He walked toward the door. "Stop," Mary screamed. "What are you going to do? If you do this again, I will ask the property management to kick you out. After I divorced, I bought a house in Cherry Garden. Now I live here. Can't I live here?" Gerald glanced at her and said, "Huh." Mary was stunned for a moment. Gerald's words made her a little shocked. She thought, how could you have the money to come here to buy a house? Your monthly salary was handed over to me. She did not expect Gerald to actually dare to talk to her like this. In the past, Gerald would not even dare to breathe heavily in front of her. When she came back to her senses, she was filled with rage. "Stop right there," she screamed. "How can you afford the house here?" She rushed to the door and chased after Gerald. Mary naturally could not catch up with Gerald. She felt that Gerald had no money to buy a house here, and Gerald showed up in Cherry Garden again, probably to take revenge on her and her daughter. So she chased in and ran a few steps. She found that she could not catch up with him. At the same time, Gerald did not enter the building where her home was located. Instead, he walked into another building. She breathed a sigh of relief, curled her lips, and said, "This good for nothing." Gerald was too lazy to pay attention to Mary. He was grateful to Irene's father. However, with these 3 years of experience, it was already kind of him not to take revenge on Mary and her daughter. If it was the previous him walking into the elevator, he returned to the house of Valerie and Macy. When he opened the door, he smelled a burst of fragrance. TSK, TSK. I can eat the food made by Dr. Manning again. I haven't eaten it for 3 years. I miss it very much, Gerald said with a smile. Other than her excellent medical skills, Valerie also had very good cooking skills. Valerie glanced at him and placed the dishes on the table. "Where did you go so early in the morning? I had something to deal with." Gerald sat down happily. Macy quickly gave him a bowl. Gerald picked up a piece of meat and put it in his mouth. He said happily, "Delicious. Dr. Manning, I think it's better for you to open a restaurant. You spend your time with dead people every day. It doesn't match your appearance and temperament." Valerie rolled her eyes at him, sat down, and said, "I have something to tell you." "Oh." Gerald nodded and said, "Tell me the details this time. This is not the first or second time that Blood Lotus is targeting the rich. According to the information I have found, they have dispatched at least 5 red card assassins," Valerie said calmly. Gerald raised his eyebrows and showed a hint of disdain. "Red card? A bunch of trash. Do you know their location? I will go and deal with them." This is the key point. Blood Lotus is very secretive this time. Their target is Audrey, but according to their past actions, their ultimate goal is to use Audrey to threaten Bradley and force Bradley to join their organization. While eating, Valerie said calmly, "In the process of our investigation, we have lost 3 watchmen." Gerald frowned and asked, "What is your plan?" Valerie glanced at Gerald and curled her lips. "You don't have to worry about this matter. I will naturally call you when I need you." Quote, "All right," Gerard nodded. Beside him, Macy blinked her eyes and a faint smile appeared on her lips. At this time, it was noon. Many people started to go downstairs for lunch at Glory World. Of course, there were also many people who brought food from home. Women did not have the habit of bringing food at noon. Before, there would always be many men in the company who would treat her to lunch. After all, in the company, she was kind of the most beautiful one. Among them, Duncan had invited her to lunch many times. Although Duncan had left, there were still quite a number of people who invited her to lunch. As expected, as soon as 12 o'clock arrived, a person from the same department stood up and said, "Vivian, do you want to have a meal together?" Vivian was in a trance the entire morning. Trevon's arrival and what Gerald was doing made her very curious. When she heard her colleague's words, she smiled sweetly and said, "Sure. Humph, great. I can go see the new boss. I heard that he's a young man who can purchase our company and make Mr. Slater admire him. He must be from a top family. If I can get him to chase me, then my man will be better than Adriel," Vivian pondered in her heart. Then, the two of them walked toward the first floor. Ads by Pub Future. Along the way, they heard many discussions. "The new boss is so young. Yeah, his surname is Kenneth and he is so rich. I have never heard of him before. Don't know if he is single." While discussing the new boss, Vivian and the male colleague walked downstairs. The male colleague smiled and said, "How about we eat spicy food? The one at the entrance of the company tastes pretty good." "Whatever," Vivian said, and she was filled with disdain. She would become a person who ate at the Marriott Hotel every time she wanted. As for this male colleague, he was just a backup. She wouldn't refuse or agree, but she wouldn't take all the gifts and benefits. When she reached the first floor, she found that many people would look at the photo wall when they passed by. All the photos of all the company's higher-ups would be shown there. She also walked over and looked up at the first line. The first line only had one photo. However, when she saw the photo, her expression suddenly changed and she exclaimed, "How is this possible?" Yes, she was shocked. There was a photo of Gerald. Her exclamation made everyone look at her. Vivian swallowed her saliva and her eyes fell on the name. When she clearly saw the two words, Gerald Kenneth, her eyes suddenly narrowed, and she could not help but take 2 steps back. If the appearance was similar, it was nothing. But the appearance and name were exactly the same. This was completely impossible. At that moment, Vivian's mind went blank. She finally figured out why Trevon would become her immediate superior, because all of this was arranged by Gerald. However, she couldn't figure out how it could be Gerald, a loser who carried bricks at the construction site, other than a strong body, had nothing else. Impossible, impossible. If he is so rich, he can't carry bricks at the construction site, and he can't be bullied at home for 3 years. I must be crazy. Vivian kept shaking her head. "Vivian, what happened to you?" the male colleague who was going to treat her to a meal asked. Vivian shook her head and said, "It's okay. Mum, I don't feel well, so I won't go have lunch with you. I want to go up and have a rest." "Not feeling well," the male colleague quickly said. "How do you want to see a doctor?" Vivian shook her head and ignored her male colleague. She turned around and walked upstairs. She felt that she was really unlucky today. She felt everything had changed. In Cherry Garden, after lunch, Macy and Valerie went back to their rooms to sleep. Gerald lay on the sofa and watched the video for a while. His phone suddenly rang. He looked at it. It was an unfamiliar phone number. He picked up the phone and said, "Hello. Hello, Mr. Kenneth. I am Bradley Herman." On the other side of the line, Bradley said. Without waiting for Gerald to speak, he quickly said, "I asked Ms. Bender from New Bank for your phone number. Yesterday, I gave you a business card, but you did not call me. That is why I asked Ms. Bender for it. Don't take it to heart. Gerald thought about it and realized it. What do you need? Gerald asked. Bradley coughed and said, It's nothing. I always wanted to thank you personally for saving my life, so I want to personally treat you to a meal at 6 o'clock in the evening. The location is on the top floor of the Marriott Hotel. I also have something to tell you. No problem, Gerald nodded and said. After hanging up the phone, Gerald let out a sigh of relief. He sat cross-legged and began to meditate. He had practiced for 3 years. It wasn't until 5:30 in the afternoon that Gerald opened his eyes and let out a breath. He briefly washed up, got up, and hailed a taxi to Marriott Hotel. It was time for dinner, and there were numerous people at the entrance of the Marriott Hotel. Most of these people were elites from Los Angeles, and those who could eat in this place had high incomes. For example, Gerald met Adriel and Matthew again, and the two were standing at the door. Matthew looked at the place not far away with anticipation. Adriel, you didn't lie to me, did you? Is Irene's best friend really not worse than her? Matthew said with a face full of expectation. I've seen her before, but whether or not you can get her, it is up to you, Adriel curled his lips and said. Matthew swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said, to be able to become friends with Irene, she must be a gold digger. I'm good at dealing with such a woman. When I'm tired of playing with her, we can still exchange. A trace of a smile appeared on Adriel's face when he heard this. When Gerald heard this, a cold light suddenly flashed through his eyes. Irene was indeed a gold digger, and she was indeed very bad to him. But no matter what, she was Gerald's ex-wife. Any man who heard this would be annoyed in his heart. Moreover, no matter what, Irene's father saved Gerald's life. He let out a breath, walked up, and said lightly, Adriel, if you dare do such a thing, you will be doomed. Adriel and Matthew both looked over when they heard Gerald's words. Adriel's eyes narrowed as he said, TSK, it's you. What? Are you planning to act in front of me? Prove that you still love Irene. It's just a pity that no matter what, you can only be a simp. You can't even touch Irene's hand for 3 years, and you're still so loyal to her. Simps are really fucking miserable. Adriel, why are you talking with this loser? If not for him, I wouldn't have been so embarrassed yesterday. I'll find someone to beat him to death. Matthew narrowed his eyes. He took out his phone as he spoke. At this time, Adriel shook his head. Irene and the others are here. Not far away, Irene came with a beautiful woman. Gerald also knew this woman. In the past, when he and Irene had not divorced, she often visited them. Her name was Angeline Weeks, Irene's best friend. What are you doing here? When she saw Gerald, Irene's eyes suddenly became cold. You followed me. My mother said you went to the cherry garden again. Angeline said with disgust, Gerald, you're so shameless. Irene divorced you, and you still want to pester her. Can you be a man? Gerald didn't speak to the two girls and only said faintly to Adriel, remember what I said just now. After speaking, he walked directly toward the Marriott Hotel. May I ask if you are Mr. Kenneth? After walking in, a waiter quickly came over and said. Gerald nodded. At this time, the waiter took out a card and said, the elevator is in the front left. If you swipe the card, you can press the button. Someone will take you upstairs. Okay. Gerald nodded as he received the card. The first 6 floors of the Marriott Hotel were banquet halls. The 6th floor and above were dining halls. The higher the floor, the more expensive the consumption was. The top floor was not open to the public. Only a small number of people could go up. If one wanted to go up to the 7th floor and above, one needed to swipe the corresponding card to go up through the elevator. The corresponding cards on each floor were also different. Gerald walked to the elevator door. At this time, Matthew and the other 3 also walked over. Irene frowned. At this time, the elevator arrived. Matthew and the others hurriedly walked in. Beep. After Matthew swiped his card, he pressed the 10th floor. Then he looked at Gerald and said with a half smile, the per capita consumption of the 10th floor is about $1,300. This should be enough to cover your monthly salary. Alas, don't say that, Angeline said. Not necessarily. Working at the construction site is a gig. Sometimes it's normal to have no work to do for a month or two. Hearing them say, Gerald was too lazy to say anything. Beep. He silently swiped his card and then pressed the top floor on the elevator. Inside the elevator, it was quiet for a moment. Both Angeline and Matthew, who were mocking Gerald, thought they had misread and winked to make sure Gerald was pressing the highest floor. Then their mouths slightly opened, and their eyes were filled with surprise. He pressed the top floor of the Marriott Hotel, which didn't welcome guests at all. Only the most powerful and richest people in Los Angeles could go there. That included Irene and Adriel. Ding! After a while, the elevator stopped, and its door opened. Two beautiful waiters with sweet smiles on their faces said, "Welcome to the 10th floor of the Marriott Hotel." The four were still surprised, and Gerald had a slight smile on his face and said, "Don't you get out of the elevator." Only then did the four recover, and Matthew swallowed. Adriel had a smile on his face and said, "It seems that yesterday you left a good impression on Kira, and she even introduced you to others." He meant that Gerald was hired by someone with the strongest background in Los Angeles. "Do you really decide to live with a woman in the future?" Irene said with a slight change of face. "It seems that these rich women don't have good taste. They like you." Next to Irene, her good friend Angeline laughed. Gerald looked up and said softly, "How do you compare it with being a mistress?" "What do you mean? How dare you say that to me?" Irene was angry. Gerald had never dared to speak against her for 3 years, and had always been obedient. After a long time, Irene had gotten used to it, and when Gerald suddenly started to resist, Irene felt furious. "You should leave," Gerald looked at them and said calmly. Adriel looked at Gerald and sneered, "You are here just because you hooked up with a rich woman. Don't give me that look. Until you can come to Marriott Hotel for dinner by yourself." With that, Adriel stepped off the elevator. Ads by Pub Future. From beginning to end, they didn't believe that Gerald could come to this place on his own. When the elevator door closed, Angeline scolded, "How dare he contradict you just after divorce?" Irene still looked angry. She was very unhappy with Gerald's attitude. What upset her most was that Gerald seemed to live a better life than her after the divorce. He had been here 2 times, and this time, he came to the top floor of the Marriott Hotel. Adriel patted her hand and said, "Don't be angry. It's not worth it to be angry with such a loser. He's just a loser who relies on others." Irene gritted her teeth and asked, "Honey, can we go to the top floor?" Adriel's mouth twitched. Gerald didn't know their reaction, nor was he interested in knowing it. After regaining his memory, he had a different understanding of this world. If he hadn't regained his memory, he wouldn't have behaved much better when he saw those rich people than when Trevor saw Tyrone. Ding! The elevator stopped at the top floor. The door opened, and a beautiful waitress was standing there. When she saw Gerald, she put on a smile and bowed. "Hello, Mr. Kenneth. Mr. Herman has been waiting for you for a long time. Please follow me." Then she made a gesture of welcome with a bow. Gerald looked down at her and saw her big boobs. He cleared his throat and looked away. Soon, they arrived in a private room. When the door was pushed open, 2 people were sitting inside. Besides Bradley, Audrey was also there. Seeing Gerald come in, Audrey was a little stunned, and then a look of curiosity appeared on her pretty face. From childhood to adulthood, she had never seen her father show so much respect to a person. Even the top billionaires in America had never seen him kneel. But she clearly remembered how excited her father was when he saw Gerald yesterday. Besides, Gerald was so young. Bradley was about to say something. Gerald said, "Just call me Gerald." Last time, Gerald was on a mission. At that time, the people with him all called Gerald Watchman No. Bradley didn't know Gerald's name. "Okay, Gerald." As Bradley said, he stood up and was about to kneel again. Gerald hurriedly held him and said, "Mr. Herman, you don't have to. It was my duty to save you back then. You don't have to do this." "Well, if it weren't for you, I would have died." Bradley was thrilled to hear Gerald call him Mr. Herman. "That's my duty," Gerald smiled calmly. Bradley stood up and said, "Please have a seat." Gerald smiled and sat down. Bradley then sat down and said, "This is my daughter Audrey. I should introduce her to you last time. This is, I know, Gerald is Kira's boyfriend. I met him yesterday," said Audrey. Gerald thought, judging from this, she seems to know Kira and have a good relationship with her. "Behave yourself. He saved your father's life," Bradley said seriously. Audrey pouted and didn't take it seriously. Anger was written all over Bradley's face. Gerald quickly smiled and said, "Mr. Herman, you don't have to do this. Easy. To be honest, I'm not Kira's boyfriend. Kira doesn't like those rich guys. I just helped her." "So you are hired by Kira?" Audrey asked with a sly smile. "I won't deny it if you think so," Gerald said with a smile. At this time, Bradley's eyes lit up slightly, and said, "Does that mean that you are actually single now? What do you think of Audrey? She is also single now. Why don't you have a try, Dad?" Hearing this, Audrey blushed. Gerald was also shocked. He thought, how Bradley wishes he could marry his daughter off. He said this every time he saw a man. Gerald cleared his throat and changed the topic. "Let's eat first." It was not until then that Bradley remembered something. He hurriedly said to the door, "Serve the dishes." Exquisite delicacies were placed on the table one after another. At this time, Bradley said, "By the way, Gerald, you seem to have a conflict with Matthew." "I know. Matthew has been chasing Kira for a long time. Yesterday, Gerald appeared as Kira's boyfriend. Matthew must be unhappy," Audrey said. Bradley narrowed his eyes and said, "The rich young generation are mostly playboys. Do you need me to handle them for you?" Gerald shook his head and said, "Don't worry." Bradley nodded. He had seen clearly how powerful Gerald was. Matthew was indeed not a threat to Gerald. Bradley said, "If you need any help in Los Angeles, please let me know. I will try my best to help you." Gerald thought for a while and said, "In that case, I do have something to trouble you." "What?" Hearing that Gerald needed help, Bradley didn't show any reluctance but excitement. He quickly asked, "What do you need me for?" Gerald cleared his throat and said, "In fact, it's not a big thing. I just hope that in the future, you can take care of Glory World. After all, you are the richest man in Los Angeles. If you give Glory World some business, it will be enough to make Glory World make money. It's just a logistics company." Bradley didn't ask too much. He nodded and said, "It's not a big deal. No problem at all." Audrey was stunned again. She had seen her father negotiate with the bosses of other companies and knew what kind of person her father was in business. He had never been so generous. Who the hell is this guy? Just because he saved my father once, he made my father so obedient to him. Audrey became more and more curious about Gerald. Gerald nodded to express his thanks, and then the three of them began to eat. The food at Marriott Hotel was indeed top grade and tasted good. Time ticked away. 8 o'clock in the evening. In an abandoned factory in a suburb of Los Angeles. Bang! Macy kicked open the iron door in front of her and rushed into the room. She was wearing a tight black uniform, outlining her curvy figure. On her back, there were two knives, one long and one short. She didn't look like a girl next door. She had the standard look of a member of Night Watch. "How's it going?" Valerie, in the same clothes behind Macy, jumped into the factory and asked. After a moment, their eyes fell not far away, and their faces changed slightly. In the dim light, a man in the same Night Watch clothes was lying on the ground. But he had lost his breath. "It's the fourth guy. Let them deal with it. Let's go back to our own positions. Don't alert the enemy. Just follow the plan," said Valerie with an angry look in her eyes. "I'm afraid that Gerald won't cooperate." Macy pursed her lips and said, "He just divorced, and—" Valerie interrupted her directly and said in a cold tone, "How dare he refuse to cooperate?" After dinner, Gerald was about to leave, but Bradley seemed to really want to have Gerald date Audrey. Bradley smiled and said, "You two are both young. It's so early now. You can hang out and have fun. Isn't it said that there's a very large bar here? Young people like to go there. Audrey, take Gerald out. I'm leaving now." Then he opened the door and ran away. "Dad, Audrey wanted to refuse at first, but then she suddenly wanted to find out more about Gerald. Then she tilted her neck and said with a smile on her pretty face, "Okay. Anyway, it's still early. Let's go to the bar to have fun." Gerald thought that he had nothing else to do, and she was a beautiful woman, so he nodded and said, "Okay." A sly smile appeared on Audrey's face. The two of them quickly left the hotel. Audrey rushed to the bar with Gerald. Radiance Bar was the largest bar in Los Angeles. It was said that the owner of this bar, Gideon Powell, used to be a gangster. Later, he started doing business. But even now, in Los Angeles, no one dared to provoke him. There were few troublemakers in this bar, so many young people were willing to come. When they arrived at the entrance of the bar, they heard a burst of noise and loud music. The two walked into the bar. Audrey was beautiful and soon attracted a lot of attention. They sat down and ordered a lot of wine. Ads by Pub Future. As soon as she sat down, Audrey said, "Well, have some wine. I gotta go to the restroom first." Of course, Audrey didn't go to find a toilet. She ran to the restroom and took out her phone to make a call. "Hazel, come here. I'm at Radiance Bar. Come here and have fun with me. Poraltra Limited. Independent marketing agency. Haha. I don't believe you. You never go to a bar," Hazel Sinclair said in disbelief. "I'm really in Radiance Bar. Can't you hear the noise? Help me get a person drunk after you come here," Audrey said, with a smile. "Get drunk. Which man do you like? Are you going to get him drunk and sleep with him?" Hazel asked from the other end of the line. "Do you think I am the same as you?" Audrey curled her lips and said, "Anyway, I'll give you 20 minutes. I'll wait for you at the gate. Be quick." Gerald sat there and poured himself a glass of wine. The wine ordered by Audrey was naturally very expensive. Gerald looked at it and found that most of them were spirits. He smiled and guessed what Audrey was thinking. But he didn't care too much about it. Although he didn't drink at all in the past 3 years, he had never gotten drunk. After a while, he found that Audrey didn't come back. He frowned and asked, "Is she having constipation?" Then he sighed. "I feel heartbroken to think that such a beautiful girl would shit." He didn't notice that 4 people were sitting opposite him. They were Adriel, Irene, Angeline, and Matthew. Matthew kept Angeline drinking. They wanted to sleep with Angeline tonight. "Isn't that Gerald?" Just then, Adriel suddenly pointed at Gerald, who was not far away, and said. Irene looked over and frowned slightly. She had lived with Gerald for 3 years, but Gerald had never drunk wine. "He's drinking alone there. It seems that he's here to get rid of his unhappiness," Adriel said, holding Irene's waist more tightly. Matthew sneered. Yesterday he humiliated me, and today he boasted off in front of me. I was thinking about how to teach him a lesson, but I didn't expect him to come to me by himself. Are you going to find someone to beat him? Adriel's eyes lit up. Matthew sneered. There's no need to look for someone. Now Radiance Bar is run by Gideon's nephew, Decker Townsend. I know him well. Aren't you getting along well with him? Adriel asked with a frown. That's because he also has a crush on Kiera, and I happen to be chasing after her, so I am not getting along well with him. But now, if he knows that Kiera's boyfriend is Gerald, what do you think he will do? Matthew sneered. Then he stood up and walked towards the second floor of the bar. Holding the glass, Gerald sipped and waited for Audrey. Not long after, a waiter came over and asked, "Are you Mr. Kenneth?" Gerald nodded. "Yes. Here is the thing. Bender wants to see you," the waiter said with a smile. Gerald was a little surprised. He didn't expect that Kiera was also there. He looked around but didn't see her. Bender is in a box on the second floor," the waitress explained. Gerald nodded and said, "Okay, lead the way." The waiter took Gerald to the second floor and then pushed open a box. Gerald walked in and frowned slightly. The room was quiet. There were many people inside. The moment Gerald walked in, the door was closed. At the same time, two burly men stood at the door with their hands clasped behind their backs. Gerald raised his eyebrows slightly and looked around. He didn't find Kiera in the box, but he saw Irene and the other three people. He was not familiar with the others at all. A young man with a cool hairstyle was sitting inside. With a cigarette, he looked at Gerald and said, "Matthew, is he Kiera's boyfriend? I wanted to beat you up a long time ago. If you lie to me, why should I lie to you? Adriel also saw him yesterday. You didn't go to the party held by Mr. Herman yesterday. At that time, Kiera brought him there and announced in public that he was her boyfriend. If you don't believe me, you can ask Adriel," Matthew said flatly, sitting on the sofa. The young man with a cool hairstyle was the one who was in charge of the bar now. He was Decker. He looked at Gerald and said, "Have a seat." Gerald chuckled in his heart. He looked at Irene and Adriel beside him and sat down on the sofa. "Wow." Decker stood up and walked up to Gerald. "If they hadn't told me, I would never believe that Kiera would fall in love with someone like you. There are two things. First, call Kiera to break up. Second, I heard from them that Kiera ads by Pub Future has held your arm." Then, Decker took a steel pipe from the coffee table and threw it in front of Gerald. He said, "Which arm? Break it yourself. Otherwise, you can't get out of here." As soon as he finished speaking, Matthew and Adriel smiled gloatingly. As for Angeline and Irene, their faces changed dramatically. They were here to see Gerald get beaten up. They had thought that Gerald would be beaten up at most. However, they never expected that Decker would want to break his arm. No matter what, they didn't know these young rich guys for long. Sometimes, rich people could really do whatever they wanted. This is too much. Irene's face changed slightly. Adriel pulled her back and said in a low voice, "It's none of your business." However, Matthew said, "Decker, I think one is not enough. You can do whatever you want. Just keep him alive. By then, I will pay half of the medical fees." Gerald still sat there calmly with a slight sneer on his face. "What? You don't understand," Decker sneered. At this time, several people around came up at once. Decker sneered and said, "If you wait for me to make a move later, I'm afraid that you won't just lose one arm." Looking at these people, Gerald sighed in his heart. "I thought the first time I fought after I regained my memory was to deal with the people of Blood Lotus. I didn't expect that I would deal with such a group of hooligans." On the first floor, Audrey came in with a girl in a sexy outfit. As soon as they entered, the girl looked at the empty seat and asked, "Who do you want me to get him drunk?" Audrey was also stunned. She looked around and didn't find Gerald. Then she called a waiter and asked, "Where is the person sitting here before? He seems to be taken to the second floor by our boss," the waiter said. Audrey frowned and asked, "Is there anything your boss wants to talk to him about?" The waiter looked at Audrey's beautiful face and said proudly, "Nothing serious. I guess he has offended our boss. He might stay in the hospital for a long time after tonight." "Gorgeous. Let me tell you something. Just leave now. Don't make our boss get angry with you later." Audrey's face changed. "What?" Then she took out her phone and walked to a relatively quiet place. "Dad, something happened. Gerald was taken away by the boss of Radiance Bar. The waiter said that he had offended his boss." "Yes, it's Gideon's Radiance Bar," Audrey said. She quickly hung up the phone, with a trace of anxiety on her face. She was curious about Gerald and brought Gerald to the bar. Obviously, her father respected Gerald. If something really happened to Gerald, she didn't know how to explain it. In the box on the second floor, Decker saw that Gerald didn't move. A cold expression flashed across his face. Suddenly, he grabbed a steel pipe, stood up, and walked toward Gerald. Adriel sneered and said, "Decker, don't spare him. This loser is my girlfriend's ex-husband, and now he's with Kiera. Beat him up. Let him know what he should do and what he shouldn't do." Matthew also laughed and said, "As I said, as long as you don't kill him, I'll pay half of the medical fees." Decker held the steel pipe and tilted his neck, grinning hideously. At this time, his phone rang. He took a look at it and quickly answered it. "Uncle, I'm in the bar. What's up?" After a while, his face suddenly changed, and he said, "Really?" Then, a voice of abuse came through the phone. "Apologize now. If he's not satisfied, don't fucking work in my bar. Get out of Los Angeles." Then Gideon hung up the phone. Matthew and the others didn't hear what Gideon said. They just saw Decker's face darken when he hung up the phone. Obviously, Decker was in a bad mood because of the phone call. They knew Decker well. If he was in a bad mood, Gerald would probably be beaten more miserably. The smiles on the two people's faces became wider. Decker heaved a sigh. He suddenly turned around, walked up to Matthew and Adriel, and raised his hand. Clap, clap, 2 slaps. Matthew and Adriel were stunned. Before they came to their senses, Decker ran to Gerald and pushed away the people surrounding him. When everyone was stunned, Decker suddenly knelt on the ground. Bang! In a private room on the second floor of the bar, Decker knelt down on the ground in front of Gerald. Adriel and Matthew, who were slapped by Decker, sat there in a daze. Irene was even more shocked. According to Adriel and Matthew, Decker was fearless in Los Angeles. How could he kneel down to Gerald? The sharp contrast made her completely confused. Decker knelt on the ground with an apologetic smile on his face. He looked at Gerald and said, "Mr. Kenneth, I am sorry. I didn't know that you were a friend of Mr. Herman. Otherwise, I wouldn't have dared to provoke you. Please forgive me." Gerald was speechless. He guessed that after he disappeared, Audrey called Bradley, and then Bradley called to deal with this. Irene was also shocked. Gerald is Bradley's friend, a friend of the richest man in Los Angeles. The corners of Adriel's and Matthew's mouths twitched. They didn't understand what was going on. For no reason, they thought of Bradley kneeling to Gerald yesterday. For a moment, they had figured out a lot of things. Why could Gerald go to the top floor of the Marriott Hotel for dinner? It was because Marriott Hotel was the property of Bradley. But what they didn't understand was that they said they had mistaken the wrong person. Why did they help Gerald now? When they were overwhelmed by a myriad of thoughts, Decker said with a smile, "Mr. Kenneth, Please forgive me. All your expenses in the bar today are on me. With a faint smile at the corners of his mouth, Gerald stood up. Don't bother me. Then he turned around and walked towards the door. Seeing that Gerald didn't want to argue with him, Decker breathed a sigh of relief. Ads by Pub Future. Seeing Gerald walking towards the door, Decker stood up and suddenly looked at the two of them, Adriel and Matthew. Drag these two out and beat them up. Damn it, they set me up. Decker, how dare you hurt us? Adriel's face changed and he said in a stern and timid tone. Go to hell. Decker's face darkened. Around them, 7 or 8 people quickly surrounded Matthew and Adriel. Decker was almost pissed off. Gerald dressed like a loser, but even Decker's uncle didn't dare to provoke him. If anything happened to Gerald, Decker would be fucked. Chapter 16 Nudie. Hearing the noise and screams behind him, Gerald stopped at the door and said calmly, Don't hurt women. Mr. Kenneth, no problem, Decker said in a hurry. Ignoring what was going on inside, Gerald pushed the door open and walked out. Outside the door, it was still very noisy. In the hall on the first floor, many people were dancing in the middle of the dance floor. Gerald walked through the crowd and returned to the booth. Seeing Gerald come back, Audrey was relieved and said, He's fine. Then she looked at the girl next to her and said, Let me introduce you my best friend, Hazel Sinclair. This is Gerald. After saying that, she showed a smile and said, I'm not good at drinking. I'm afraid that you won't be happy, so I called my bestie. Here, is that okay? Gerald smiled and said, As long as you are happy, and I just drink a little. Wow, cutie. Audrey has never been to a bar. You asked her out. Does Audrey have a crush on you? Obviously, Hazel was much more outgoing. Hazel, don't talk nonsense. Audrey glared at her and whispered in Hazel's ear, Don't talk nonsense. Get him drunk. Hazel smiled noncommittally, poured a full glass of wine, and said, It's the first time we have met. I'd like to have a toast to you first. Gerald was surprised. Audrey ordered strong spirits, but Hazel drank up a glass directly. She looked like she could drink a lot. At the back door of Radiance Bar, Decker kicked Adriel and Matthew onto the ground. He spat at the two and said, Idiots. How dare you provoke him? Get out of here. Behind them, Irene and Angeline were standing there with two pale faces. Decker glanced at the two women, curled his lips, turned around, and took his people back to the bar. After he left, the two of them hurried over to help the two men up. Are you okay? They asked. Bah. Adriel threw up and spat blood. His face darkened. Of course, Decker didn't dare to kill them. Adriel and Matthew had powerful backgrounds. Decker couldn't explain to his uncle if he killed them. But Decker beat them up. Didn't you say that Gerald was just a loser who moved bricks on the construction site? Adriel looked at Irene with an unfriendly expression. Adriel was angry, but he couldn't deal with Decker, so he subconsciously vented his anger on Irene. Irene's face changed slightly and she said, Yes, I have been married to him for 3 years. He is just a loser. He doesn't fight. Back at home, you saw him when we first met him at New Bank. Then why is Decker afraid of him? Adriel asked with a long face. Irene was stunned and said in a low voice, I don't know either. Adriel's face darkened. He looked at Irene, gritted his teeth, and said, I'm injured. You must stay with me tonight, or we'll break up. You have to return me the car I gave you and the funds I bought. Irene frowned. She was not easy to deal with either. She knew that Adriel wouldn't cherish her if Adriel could get her too easily. No, I have something to deal with at home tonight. Irene shook her head. At the same time, in Irene's house, Cherry Garden, Mary was sitting on the sofa bought by Gerald and watching TV. Next to her, Vivian was sitting there with a worried look. Vivian, what's wrong with you? I don't know when Irene will come back. Mary looked at Vivian and asked, what are you thinking about? Vivian gritted her teeth and said, Mary, we have a new boss. Just a new boss. It won't affect your work, Mary said casually. Vivian shook her head and said, you are wrong. Do you know who our new boss is? It's Gerald, Irene's ex-husband. Mary looked at Vivian in astonishment. Mary looked at Vivian in shock. Then Mary said disdainfully, how is that possible? We all know Gerald well. If he can afford to buy your company, he doesn't need to work in a plant, and Irene won't divorce him. If he does have that much money, Irene will definitely treat him well. I'm telling the truth, Vivian added worriedly, and I feel like he did it on purpose. Yesterday, my boss argued with him at the entrance because of me, and then my boss was inexplicably fired. You think too much. It's probably that they have the same name, Mary said indifferently. Don't look for trouble yourself. Vivian shook her head and said, his photo is hanging on the wall of our company. Mary did not believe it. She pouted and said, are you sick? Are you hallucinating? Okay then, let's think about it. I'll assume that you're right. But have you ever thought that if Gerald was so rich, why would he move bricks in a plant for 3 years? It's a hard job. I don't know what's going on either. I'm so worried now. If he really is our boss, my work. Vivian said worriedly. You're just thinking too much. Let's not talk about this for now. It's impossible. At most, you can just change a job, Mary said. My new son-in-law, Adriel, has a larger company than your current logistics company. I'll ask Irene to tell Adriel. You can go to work at his company. Mary was satisfied with her new son-in-law. Adriel bought Mary bags, and he even bought a car for Irene. Mary thought that it was so lucky for her daughter to find such a rich person. As for what Vivian said, Mary did not believe it at all. It was already around 10 o'clock in the evening. At Radiance Bar. At the booth of the bar, Gerald and Hazel were both embarrassed. In the middle of the two, Audrey was holding a wine bottle. Her entire face was red. She pouted and looked at Gerald, saying, come on, let's continue drinking. Today, I must get you drunk and make you confess everything. Well, Audrey was drunk. Ads by Pub Future. She originally wanted to get Gerald drunk. She had planned to drink a bit. But Audrey was a bit of a poor drinker. After drinking at most 2 glasses of liquor, Gerald was fine, but Audrey could not hold on. Don't let her drink anymore. Gerald looked at Hazel and added, send her home first. Home. Don't go home. Audrey grabbed Gerald and said, if you are not drunk today, then you are not allowed to go back. Hazel, I find you to make Gerald drunk. Drink with him. I am already drunk. In order to coax Audrey, Gerald hurriedly said. Really? Audrey's eyes lit up slightly as she said, then tell me, who exactly you are and why my father is obedient to you. Gerald laughed. Audrey was drunk and told him everything. However, he did not care too much. Hazel ran over and held Audrey. She looked at Gerald and said, your alcohol tolerance is not bad. Hazel was a bit shocked. Her alcohol tolerance was good. She had rarely been drunk in a bar, but Gerald drank much more than her. If it was someone else, he would have been drunk at least 2 or 3 times, but Gerald seemed to be fine. Hazel, don't talk nonsense with him. Hurry up and get him drunk. Humph. In the end, Audrey still muttered something, but because it was too noisy, Hazel couldn't hear it clearly. Pa. At this time, Hazel lightly patted Audrey's neck. Audrey was stunned for a moment and then leaned on Hazel. Gerald's expression changed slightly. Seeing this, he could tell that Hazel had practiced some skills before. Please carry her to the car. We will send her back, Hazel smiled bitterly and said. I will call a person to drive us back. Gerald nodded. He picked Audrey up gently and walked out the door with Hazel. He looked down at Audrey in his arms and smiled. This was the first time he had seen such a girl. She was indifferent when they first met and looked like a goddess. When they met in private today, Audrey was a bit cute. Now, she was drunk, blushing, with a hint of playfulness and cuteness. Unfortunately, such a girl was targeted by Blood Lotus. Gerald thought in his heart, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Hazel called for a driver and then drove to Audrey's house. Audrey's home was located in a villa area in Los Angeles. The house in this place was very expensive. A villa was worth millions. Of course, this was nothing to Audrey's family because his father was the richest man in Los Angeles. They arrived at the villa community. When the car stopped, the driver said, "Here we are." "Okay. Sorry to trouble you." Hazel sat in the back row. She held Audrey, opened the door, and said to Gerald, "Come on, give me a hand." Gerald did not move. He, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, stared fixedly at the position of the rearview mirror. Then, he licked his lips and said, "Are those people from Blood Lotus?" He knew that Blood Lotus had asked their people to follow Audrey. During this time, Valerie and Macy were also busy with this matter, but Gerald did not expect that he would meet them. The driver pushed the door. At this time, Hazel suddenly changed her expression and said, "Killer." Suddenly, two black shadows pounced over. One of them went straight to the driver's seat, a dagger glowing with a cold light in his hand stabbing directly at the driver's heart. At the critical moment, Gerald pulled the driver back, but the dagger pierced his thigh. "Ah!" The driver screamed. The other black shadow pounced towards the back row and headed straight for Hazel. Hazel suddenly closed the door and dodged sideways. At the same time, she kicked the person's lower abdomen. "Close the door and lock it," she shouted. At the same time, she closed the back door to ensure Audrey's safety. Even if she didn't say it, the driver would have done the same. He did not care about his thigh that had been stabbed. He locked the door quickly. At that time, Gerald had already gotten out of the car. Seeing Gerald leave the front passenger seat, Hazel was overjoyed. She thought that Gerald was coming to help. "You deal with." However, before she could finish her words, Gerald had already disappeared like a wisp of smoke. "You coward." Hazel was so angry that she wanted to scream. At this time, she would be happy even if Gerald chose to hide in the car. But she never expected that Gerald would actually run away so quickly. But she did not have time to think about it. After the door was locked, the two men pounced at her at the same time. Gerald did not slip away. He was very fast and directly jumped into Audrey's villa. The two people outside were nothing. Although Hazel had to deal with two people, Gerald knew that it was not difficult for her. And the real expert was hiding in Audrey's home. Well, it seems that the intelligence is wrong. It showed that the bodyguard beside Audrey is useless, but you can actually find me. It is clear that the intelligence is wrong. As he spoke, the lights in the living room were turned on. With a bang. In the living room, a young man with yellow hair was sitting on the sofa. He sat there with a dagger in his hand. He looked at Gerald with a hint of mockery. Gerald didn't say anything. He was also looking at the man. "You're calm. It's a pity that you will be a dead person soon," the young man said with a smile. "Really?" Gerald chuckled. "Yes," the young man added lightly, "because I am the youngest red card assassin in Blood Lotus." At this point, there was a trace of disdain on his face as he smiled faintly. "You probably haven't heard of Blood Lotus, right?" "That's right. This kind of secret organization is not something that an ordinary person like you can come into contact with. I'm already surprised since you found me. However, in 30 seconds, you will become a dead person. If you have any last words, hurry up and say them." Obviously, this young man was arrogant. 3 seconds. Gerald said indifferently. What? The young man's expression changed. I said that in 3 seconds, I'll finish you. As his voice fell, Gerald moved. This was the first time he took action since he restored his memories. It had been 3 years. At this moment, if someone familiar with Gerald saw his look, his expression would definitely shock the person. Gerald's look was scary and fierce. It was cold, ruthless, and murderous. It was like a god of death descended upon this world. What? The young man was stunned. In just an instant, Gerald had already gotten to the young man. Gerald smiled slightly as he said, "How dare you act arrogantly in front of me? You are just a piece of shit." Boom! The young man did not react at all. Gerald's fist had already landed on the young man's face. Bang! Ads by Pub Future. The young man's feet suddenly left the ground. However, in the next second, he felt that Gerald grabbed his foot, and then his entire person had been ruthlessly smashed onto the ground. The tiles in Audrey's house had been shattered. The young man had no chance to react. He felt that the dagger in his hand had already been grabbed by Gerald. The cold dagger was pressed against the young man's neck. The young man was shocked and scared. He felt that cold rose from his back to his head. And he was in a cold sweat. He had always been confident that he was the genius of Blood Lotus, the youngest red card assassin. He had never failed, once he took the mission. But facing Gerald, he didn't even have the chance to attack. The gap between them was too large. "My name is Lincoln Felton. My grandfather is Franklin Felton, the leader of Blood Lotus. You can't kill me," the young man said in a low voice. "Franklin. He'd better be a coward for the rest of his life. If he dares to come out and attract my attention, I'll cut off his head first." Gerald sneered. He looked at Lincoln's face coldly. Then Gerald licked his lips and said, "I haven't killed anyone in 3 years. Congratulations, you'll become my first kill after my return." 3 years. Lincoln was stunned at first, then he said in shock, You are Watchman No. You. Whoosh. Before he could finish his words, the dagger in Gerald's hand suddenly slid across his neck, and blood slowly flowed out from Lincoln's neck. The shock in Lincoln's eyes did not fade, but his breathing had completely stopped. Gerald smiled. He pulled a few pieces of paper with his hand and covered the neck of the corpse. In that way, the blood would not flow to the ground. Then Gerald looked outside. Curses rang out. This coward actually ran away. He escaped. He let me fight 2 people alone. Bastard, if you dare to approach Audrey in the future, I will beat you every time I see you. It was Hazel. Gerald smiled. Looking at the corpse on the ground, he knew that it was not good for Hazel and the others to see it. He picked up the corpse and looked outside again. He turned off the lights, opened the window next to him, and jumped out. As a night watch, it was easy for him to deal with all this, not letting ordinary people find out and not disturbing the peaceful life of ordinary people. Gerald perfectly avoided the cameras and carried the person to a place where no one was around. Then, he made a phone call to Valerie and said, "Hello, I have dealt with a red card assassin. I'm in soon." An SUV stopped next to Gerald. The window of the car was rolled down. Then Gerald saw Valerie and Macy, who were wearing night watch uniforms and carrying 2 knives on their backs. "What happened?" Valerie asked. Gerald opened the trunk and stuffed the corpse into it. Then he got into the car and explained in detail. After Valerie heard this, he frowned. "Why didn't you capture him alive? If we capture him alive, I can think of a way to find out about their plans this time." "Well," Gerald scratched his head and said, "he was acting arrogantly in front of me. I couldn't help and killed him." Macy said with a smile, "Drive. Manning, don't worry. It's already quite good to be able to deal with a red card assassin." "Humph." Valerie snorted. The morning sunlight shone into the bedroom from the ground. Audrey opened her sleepy eyes and saw a face that was putting on a mask. Hazel. Audrey rubbed her eyes slightly. Why are you at my house? Do you know how dangerous it was yesterday? Hazel glared at Audrey and said, last night, someone came to assassinate you. Audrey was stunned and then said, you must have beaten them away again. Humph, of course. You know I would do that for you, Hazel said proudly. I was drunk last night, right? Unfortunately, I couldn't get Gerald drunk, and I couldn't know anything from him. I am really curious why my dad is so obedient to him. How did he save my dad back then? Audrey said regretfully. Don't talk about him, that coward. When Hazel heard Gerald, she was so angry that she scolded. Yesterday, he saw someone rushing over, so he immediately ran away. Can someone like him save your dad? I don't believe it. All right, I'll go wash up first. Audrey got up and walked out of the bedroom. After taking a few steps, she frowned in the living room and asked, Hazel, why is the floor in my house cracked? Gerald was in a good mood in the morning. He handed over the corpse to Valerie and Macy last night. He went home and had a good sleep. He slept until 10 o'clock in the morning before he got up and slowly washed up. Then he went downstairs to have breakfast. As soon as he arrived at the gate of the community, a sharp and mean voice sounded. Gerald, you are shameless. Did you really borrow money to rent a house in our community? Gerald was naturally familiar with this voice. It was Mary. She bought vegetables and was about to go home. Gerald frowned and did not intend to pay attention to her words. However, Mary said, I am telling you, this is useless. It's impossible for you and Irene to remarry. How can you compare to Adriel? He's richer than you, and he's more generous than you. He always bought us gifts. Gerald frowned and glanced at Mary. Your husband saved me once back then, so I'll remind you that Adriel is not a good person. Really? Mary curled her lips and added, do you see my clothes? Adriel bought them. They cost $1,000. Gerald didn't want to talk to her anymore. Mary kept saying, by the way, Vivian said yesterday that you are the boss of her company. How is that possible? It's already 10 o'clock and you're still idling around. You'll never become a rich man. Gerald was unwilling to argue with this shrew. He ignored her and turned to leave. When he arrived at a breakfast shop, he asked for a cup of coffee and bread. He looked through his phone and ate. I know you will be here. Gerald looked up and found Trevor sitting in front of him, looking at him speechlessly. Gerald often came to this shop, so he was not surprised that Trevor could find him. Why do you come here instead of going to work? Gerald asked in surprise. If you don't tell me what is going on, I won't go to work. When I saw that our new boss's name was Gerald, I was stunned. Tell me what is going on. Also, the things that happened to Simeon are caused by you, right? Trevor mumbled. Simeon was his foreman. Since the last time Gerald let Kira deal with Simeon, Gerald no longer paid attention to Simeon. What happened to him? Gerald asked. Quote, don't you know? Several real estate companies are going to sue him. The compensation is a large amount of money. Trevor grabbed a piece of bread and stuffed it into his mouth. Then he added, yesterday, Simeon called me and asked me to talk to you. Trevor did not seem to be awkward with the change in Gerald's identity. They were still friends. He deserves it. And the project he contracted indeed has some problems. This is undeniable. He can only blame himself. Gerald said calmly. Trevor curled his lips and said, I didn't come to find you for this. I am asking you what happened. How did you suddenly become the boss of Glory World? Gerald let out a breath. He felt that he didn't need to lie to Trevor. I can't remember everything that happened 3 years ago. You know about this, right? Gerald said. Yes. Trevor nodded and added, and then. Actually, I am a very rich person. Suddenly, I recovered my memory and found the bank card. I checked it and found that there was a lot of money in it. In order to make Irene and her family regret it, I bought Glory World and deliberately let Vivian find out that I am rich, Gerald explained simply. As for the watchman, he naturally could not tell Trevor. You are taking revenge. Trevor's eyes lit up. Gerald smiled and said, I thought so before, but now, my hatred for them is not so deep. After recovering his memory, his vision had indeed changed a lot. He did not belong here in the first place. In any case, Irene's father saved Gerald's life. That house was nothing to Gerald now. He could just treat it as a repayment of gratitude. Of course, Gerald could not completely forget the grievances he had suffered in the past 3 years. No matter what, it adds by pub future was necessary to teach Irene and her mother a lesson. You should go to work. Although I am the boss, it is not good for you to skip work all the time. Moreover, you have to turn something from here. Although I will not expel you, it's not good if you're criticized by others, Gerald said. I know, but I have taken a day off today. The company directly paid me a salary of $80,000 yesterday. I can't wait. I have already sent Liam to the hospital for surgery yesterday. Today, I ran out to find you when he was asleep, Trevor said. Gerald nodded and said, all right, I'll go with you to see Liam later. At the same time, at the entrance of Glory World, a bald middle-aged man in a suit was holding a briefcase and a bottle of good wine in both hands. He was wandering anxiously at the door. Soon, a beautiful woman ran over. When she saw the middle-aged man, she asked in surprise, Mr. Bennett, why did you come? To find me. The person in front of her was Mike Bennett, Irene's uncle, Mary's brother. When Mike saw Vivian, he smiled and quickly said, Vivian, here's the thing. I originally wanted to see Mr. Slater. Previously, Glory World had always been in charge of transporting our company's goods. Yesterday, Mr. Slater suddenly told me that we will terminate the cooperation. I went to look for other logistics companies. But their prices are too high. Vivian's expression changed slightly. She suddenly remembered what Gerald said to them at the door when Gerald got divorced that day. He said, you will regret it. And now, Gerald had become Vivian's boss, and the company had stopped working with Mike. Vivian didn't know exactly what was going on, but she knew that Gerald was completely different from the person she had known. Vivian smiled bitterly and said, I can't help you with this matter. I'm just an ordinary employee of the company. I met Mr. Slater at the door just now, but he didn't want to talk to me. I am thinking about whether you can take me to the company. I'll go find Mr. Slater, Mike said. Vivian let out a breath and looked at Mike. Mr. Bennett, although I don't know what's going on, this is indeed the truth. Mr. Slater is no longer our boss. Our new boss is Gerald. Gerald. Which Gerald? Mike asked. Vivian smiled bitterly. Who else could it be? Irene's ex-husband. Mike's expression suddenly changed. He couldn't believe it. Vivian said, why don't you go find Irene and her mom? But I don't think it will work. We treated Gerald so rudely before. He is taking revenge on us, Mike said with a pale face. In fact, this matter had nothing to do with Gerald. Yesterday, Gerald told Bradley to take care of Glory World. Then, Bradley immediately called Tyrone to talk about cooperation. When Tyrone received the phone call, he was so scared that he wet his pants. Bradley was the richest man in Los Angeles. Bradley has lots of business. After receiving this news, Tyrone quickly made a judgment and directly stopped some of the less important businesses, leaving the resources to cooperate with Bradley. Mike was one of the less important ones. To be honest, I am also in a mess right now. Vivian's beautiful face was full of worry as she said, I'm working for the company. Now, but I feel like I might lose my job any moment. After eating with Trevor, Gerald went to the hospital with him to see Liam. And then Gerald said goodbye to Trevor and took a taxi back home. Now, he didn't need to work in the factory anymore. And he was the boss of Glory World. Valerie hadn't arranged any mission for him for the time being. Gerald did feel a bit bored. When he returned home, it was already noon. Valerie and Macy had finished cooking. When Gerald returned, Valerie glanced at him and said, "You are quite free." Gerald chuckled and said, "I have nothing to do, and I haven't returned to night watch. There is nothing for me to do." Valerie rolled her eyes at Gerald and said, "You don't need to go back to night watch." "Huh?" Gerald asked in surprise, "What do you mean? You disappeared for 3 years. I just called the boss. This is also his intention. In these 3 years, whether it is the night watch or other people, they all think that you have completely disappeared. So you don't need to be exposed for the time being. In this city, it is easier for you to cooperate with us as a spy to carry out some tasks," Valerie said. Gerald's eyes lit up. "That's true. I will have more freedom. What about you guys? How's the mission?" Gerald asked. Valerie said, "It's being carried out according to the plan. It's time to get you something to do." Beside him, Macy was eating when she suddenly coughed. Gerald didn't care about it too much. His eyes lit up, and he said, "Have you found their people?" Valerie replied, "No, but we know their goal is to kidnap or kill Audrey to force Bradley to join their organization. You know, Bradley knows our existence. When we first arrived, we had already talked to Bradley. The most important thing now is to ensure Audrey's safety." Gerald asked, So we need to send someone who isn't known by Blood Lotus to protect Audrey." Valerie took a bite of the food and said calmly, "So do you want me to be Audrey's bodyguard?" Gerald asked in surprise. He would not refuse this kind of mission. In the past, when he was on a mission, he did many things like going to be a bodyguard. Not a bodyguard. If we send a bodyguard, it's too obvious. Valerie added, "They will probably guess that you are our people, so they will choose to attack when you're not with her." At this point, Valerie looked at Gerald and said, "You have disappeared for 3 years. In Los Angeles, you are just an ordinary person. So no one will think too much about your appearing by Audrey's side now. Moreover, you will be her husband." Wait. Gerald felt that something was wrong. He quickly said, "What did you say?" "I said that you'll be her husband." Then Valerie added calmly, "I told you before that after we arrived in Los Angeles, we had already communicated with Bradley. So he organized such a gathering and announced that anyone could pursue Audrey. In the end, you will win and marry Audrey. You become the son-in-law of the Herman family." As she spoke, she looked at Gerald, whose eyes widened, and said, "In this way, you can be with Audrey, and even sleep in the same bed as her. You can completely protect her everywhere. I am not that ordinary now. I bought a company. My photo is still posted on that company." Gerald rubbed his head and said, "That's good. This company is a gift from Bradley," Valerie said in a calm tone. Gerald frowned. This way, all people would think that Gerald was really a freeloader. "But I just divorced. Bradley announced it to the public for 2 or 3 days, and then I'm going to marry Audrey." "This is too fast," Gerald said. "Bradley is in fear. If not for your last night, Audrey would have been killed," Valerie said. Gerald slowly let out a breath. He pondered, his fingers lightly tapping on the table. "But drive, Manning, you know that. My body and my heart belong to you. Be serious. Only when you are by Audrey's side can we be completely at ease," Valerie snorted coldly. Gerald curled his lips and said, "As for marrying Audrey, whether I am willing or not, it doesn't matter. It depends on Audrey. Bradley knows our existence, but Audrey doesn't. Valerie thought for a moment. At this time, Gerald's phone suddenly rang. He picked it up and found that it was Irene calling. Gerald frowned and answered the phone. Hello, what's the matter? On the other side of the line, Irene's voice sounded, I heard that you are now the boss of Glory World. Amazing. I don't know who you are relying on, but you actually got such a big company. There was a hint of jealousy in her words. Irene had always believed that Gerald was a loser and didn't think that Gerald could buy such a company on his own. This was definitely a gift from someone. Gerald had hooked up with a rich woman. Of course, Irene was very jealous. The things that Adriel had given her were too shabby in comparison to what Gerald currently had. Gerald didn't want to explain anything to her. In fact, he felt that it was not bad to draw a line with Irene and her mother through the whole divorce thing. Why are you calling me? If there is nothing else, I will hang up, Gerald said lightly. Irene continued, it is different when you are rich. You dare to talk to me like this. Gerald, good for you. Don't you live in my neighborhood? Come to my house. I want to make things clear with you since we got divorced. After that, Irene hung up the phone. Gerald frowned, but he still decided to go there. He also wanted to make things clear. He said to Valerie, I'll go out first. Then as for what I've said, you agreed, right? Valerie said. Gerald hurriedly said, what are you talking about? I can't get married in haste. Although this may be a fake marriage, what if Audrey falls in love with me? There are many ways to ensure her safety. She does not necessarily have to marry me. Let me think about it. This is a strategic plan. Valerie quickly said. Gerald smiled and did not agree. He put on his shoes and disappeared. Macy said happily, I told you he won't agree. After all, he just divorced, and the last marriage was not very good. Valerie pondered for a moment and then said seriously, that's true. He showed fear of getting married. He's mentally ill. He must see a doctor. Adds by pub future. Gerald left the house and returned to his former residence. He knocked on the door, and the door was opened quickly. What surprised Gerald was that there was a large group of people sitting in the room. There were more than a dozen people. Vivian and her family, Mike and his family, and some other relatives were all sitting inside. Come in, Irene, who opened the door, said. Gerald walked into the room, and Irene closed the door. At this time, Mary said in a strange tone, oh, it's amazing. You hooked up with a rich woman after divorcing and started to plot against us, right? Mary was still unwilling to admit that Gerald was Vivian's boss. But, with the confirmation of her brother, Mike, she had to admit that it was true. Plot against you. I'm not that bored. Gerald pursed his lips. This was what he was thinking. Mary smiled and said, you don't like us now, do you? You bought the company and immediately stopped cooperation with Mike. If you don't take revenge, then what is it? Gerald touched his nose. In the morning, Tyrone called him and told him that he took over the business of the Herman family and then cut off the business of some small companies. And Mike's company was probably in these small companies. What? You have nothing to say. Mary sneered. Hearing her words, Gerald flew into a rage. They had saved Gerald's life back then. So even if he had recovered his memories, he was still grateful to them. Mary mocked him a few times, but Gerald just laughed it off. But at this time, when he heard her strange tone, he felt that there was no need for him to endure anymore. He raised his eyebrows, looked at Mary, and said, not to mention that I won't manage the company myself. I will not interfere in the company's affairs. Even if I am the one who did this, so what? His tone was a bit cold. In an instant, Mary froze. After a moment, she screamed, aren't you just a freeloader? Why are you so arrogant? She stared at Gerald and said, don't forget that my husband saved your life. We even let you stay at our home for 3 years. Now that you are divorced, you forget what we've done for you. You ungrateful bastard. At this time, Vivian's father, Leroy, also said, Yes, Gerald, 3 years ago, your life was saved by my brother. It is indeed a little unkind of you to do this now. Gerald was furious. He suddenly looked at Leroy and said, Are you pretending to be a good person here? In the past 3 years, you guys have never respected me. Speaking of relying on others, what is the difference between me and Mary and Irene? Did Mary and Irene go out to do some work in the past 3 years? I worked hard at the construction site. Yes, I didn't earn much money. You have always looked down on my ability over these 3 years. But I gave you at least $3,200 every month. What have you done? I worked hard to earn money and raised you for 3 years, but I never got a thanks from you. You thought my work was embarrassing. And Irene is beautiful. She deserves better. But she married me. So in the whole family, none of you liked me, Gerald cursed. For a moment, everyone was stunned. Gerald sneered and said, Don't you forget that the house you live in now is bought with my money. And then, Irene cheated on me and found a rich guy. Then Mary kicked me out immediately and asked Irene to divorce me. And drove me out. When it comes to relying on others, you are the best, Gerald said with a sneer. No one said a word. The whole room was completely quiet. They never expected that Gerald would dare to speak to them so loudly one day. As for Mary and Irene, their faces were extremely pale. After Mary was stunned for a moment, she suddenly screamed and jumped at Gerald, shouting, You ungrateful bastard, I will kill you today. As she spoke, she waved her hand and rushed towards Gerald. Pa! Gerald suddenly raised his hand and slapped her face. Mary was completely stunned. Mom! Irene quickly ran over and supported Mary. Then Irene looked at Gerald and said, Gerald, you dared to hit my mother. You dared to hit me, you ungrateful bastard. Mary was about to go crazy. Gerald sneered, This is what you deserve, for what you did to me in the past 3 years, and what you did during the divorce. Gerald, don't go too far. At this time, a few young people stood up. Gerald showed a trace of disdain. He looked up at them and said, What? Do you want to fight? At this moment, none of the people who stood up dared to move. Gerald's eyes were so cold that they made everyone feel strange and afraid. Leroy was also stunned. He was a teacher and felt that he could read people. But Gerald's change shocked him. Gerald, there's no need to do this. Everyone, don't make things worse. Leroy hurriedly said. Gerald looked at him indifferently, then looked at Irene and said, As you said, since we are divorced, there is no relationship between us. After today, we are just strangers. I will not disturb your life, and you shouldn't bother me either. Vivian and Mike's faces changed. Vivian was worried that she would lose her job, and Mike was even paler. The scale of their company was not big. Previously, when they cooperated with Glory World, it charged reasonably. As for the other logistics companies in Los Angeles, they asked much higher, and the efficiency was not as fast as Glory World. This was a huge loss for Mike. Mike got up and looked at Gerald. Gerald, our company. Gerald curled his lips and said, Don't talk to me about this. It's none of my business. Mary recovered at this time. She gritted her teeth and looked at Gerald. Gerald, how can you be so heartless? You slapped me. Remember, Adriel will not let you go easily. You have some money, so what? Don't think that you can come to my house to show off. Gerald sneered. As I said, we are strangers from today onwards. As for Adriel, he hasn't married your daughter yet. He'll probably dump your daughter when he gets tired of her. And I don't even care about Adriel. After